I was trying to picture how to do this talk, and I was picturing all of us having practice for 3 hours, fascinating stuff, but really, I've tried to focus hard, and it's been great, and I've learned a lot, but it's a lot of focusing. So what I thought I would try to do to bring it together is do something a little more participatory. So I'm going to do some talking, and then I'm going to ask you to do some thinking. Wait, where is that? The goals here in the session are to provide a little intellectual framework for policy making, in particular trying to bring together some of the ideas that we've already had, and introduce more of a social dimension and a policy making dimension to what we've talked about so far. That said, I thought we would do that using a case study, a little more in-depth of a hybrid green infrastructure intervention. Mostly, anyway, we can talk about those definitions. It's a very interesting question, but a hybrid infrastructure intervention. And I'll provide just a little bit of further material on barriers to adaptation. I know the session goal said that I would talk about those, but frankly, I couldn't see how to do it all in 45, 50, 60 minutes. So I thought I would really focus on the intellectual framework and decision making. So that's what we're going to do. And a lot of what I'm going to present does come out of the STAGE project that you've already heard some about. I just wanted to give the NSF shout out for the grant. And this is our website. I'll show it again at the end, but it will have these talks on it, or a connection to these talks that will be posted on, we have a YouTube channel for other talks. And then it has a lot of other material that hopefully you will find useful. So that's our website, resilieninfrastructure.org. I'm really glad that I snagged that website name. I could probably sell it for money by now. That's all right. So the case study that I'm going to present, so I'm going to present this case study, and then I'm going to ask you to think to yourselves and talk to your neighbor about some of the things in it, and then in the intellectual framework. So that's sort of the structure of our. And I chose in particular to present a case study that I think you won't be familiar with. I was not familiar with up to a year ago because I wanted to sort of move us out of our zone of comfort. And so this is the Palisados in Jamaica. And I just want to acknowledge Dale Weber, who's a professor at the University of West Indies, and provided a lot of this information. He's in the STAGE working group. And so he's been very helpful. And now I want to get my notes out so I be sure to get the information right. So this is a little, as you can see, a little bit of land. Some people might call it a Tumbalo. There's some discussion about which it is. And it connects, the town of Port Royal, or the settlement, I think you would say, and the Manly International Airport. This is Kingston, Jamaica. Okay, and so then you can see how narrow the connection is. This is from 1996, in a photograph from 1996. Port Royal, so this is Kingston, just to remind you. If you haven't been to Jamaica lately, you can sort of imagine, you can think it's February and you're going there now. And Kingston is this, whoa, back you go. Try again. Port Royal is this is the Palisados off through there. Kingston, by the way, is the capital. This is another view of the harbor, a little more technical. So there's Kingston, there's the Kingston Harbor, major shipping area, and Port Royal. One of the things that's really interesting, Port Royal was where the pirates lived and visited. It was known for a while as the wickedest town in the world, where apparently even the parrots were killed. So they say. Now, I can definitely tell you that the pirate part is not made up. That's true. British encouraged piracy, and they encouraged the pirates to hang out there. The parrot I really can't swear to, that may or may not be true. But this is a very important airport, about 130 international flights a week that supply all of Kingston. This is if there are 1 meter sea level rise. This is not a very fancy model. I'm sure there could be a better model, but it does give you the basic idea that Port Royal is sunk with a 1 meter sea level rise. Close to Kingston is not too bad because this is on higher elevation, except this area over here. Hurricane Ivan in 2004 really hit the region very hard. It hit the region particularly hard because in previous hurricanes, the residents had evacuated and other people had come in and looted, and so the residents didn't leave their homes. They really sheltered in place for better and worse. And so the people in Port Royal stayed where they were, even though they knew perfectly well this hurricane was coming and that they were vulnerable. It's 3,300 people live in Port Royal. It's not a huge population, but it's significant, right? And they all stayed there. And then Hurricane Ivan absolutely wiped out this piece of road. And it wiped out the road leading up to the airport. And so not only was Port Royal isolated, but the airport was useless for really a long period of time. And this is where normally all of the supplies to provide disaster relief would have flown into, right? And so it was bad, frankly. It was really bad. And it was bad for a long time. It was not a quick recovery. And the government then faced a question what they were going to do about this very vulnerable place, this very vulnerable population. Now, the obvious choice, you might say, logically, would be to pick it up and move it. It's clearly sort of an illogical place, right, to have people and to have an airport. But, of course, nothing is that easy. The people from Port Royal don't want to leave. That's home. The airport is not easily moved because Kingston is in a basin surrounded by mountains. It's not easy to find another flat area of land sufficient for an airport. So they really had to figure out a way to protect the Palisades. So this is the choice that was made by the Jamaican government, is to drastically reinforce the strip of land that's connecting it. The harbor side, harbor side, ocean side. Clear, everybody? Yeah, okay, so we get that. Good, excellent. So this is when it was under construction. The distance altogether is about 4 kilometers. And here's the basic structure of what they came up with. This is either just water or it's mangrove, right? And then there's revetment, big boulders, 1.5 tons, some of them. I'm sorry. So these are the smaller boulders. This is the road, a little swale, sand dune, and revetment, and then this is the ocean side. So that's the basic structure for what they're doing. And so it's hybrid because it's including the mangroves, right, with the built structure. I would call it green infrastructure, and the Army Corps of Engineers would probably call it nature-based because it is not natural anymore, but it's designed to provide some of the ecological function of the natural function, some of the ecological function. One of the great things, just to go back over this, so this is the basic structure for the mangrove side, right? They're just doing plantings here with the revetment and the boardwalk. And there's some of the, idea of the sand dunes. Hey, does that look familiar? So we visited the mangrove sand dunes. The mangroves are being grown at the University of West Indies. They moved 6,000 plants that took about 2-3 years to grow this tall, and they just planted them. The construction itself, and the hard construction was done around 2012. The mangroves just got put in. It's very exciting. It took a long time to come up with the extra money for the planting. Not surprising, it's a little easier to budget for the hard structure, right? And it's a little harder to come up with the soft money. I think that's not super unusual. And so this is Mona Weber, who's the faculty member who grew all these lovely little plantings at her lab. Phase 1 costs for the elevation of the road, revetment, et cetera, about $65 million. Phase 2, sand dunes, whole thing, only about $4 million. And that's the basic cost structure. It was funded by the Chinese Export-Import Bank, the XM Bank. They lent the money, and the Chinese construction companies did the fundamental work, which is basically how work is getting done in the region. So that's our case study. When we look at, they have a regular NEPA review, an environmental impact statement that they did community consultations for. In that, some of the things that really came forward was that the local fisher people from Port Royal wanted mangroves. They were very clear about that. People here understand why. Why did they want mangroves? Fisheries, right. And they also are perfectly aware they provide resilience to the hurricanes, but a lot of it was for fisheries. As you probably know, Jamaica is having a lot of difficulty with keeping their fish stocks up. Sand dunes, people didn't care too much about them. This was more the environmental engineers got excited about these things. People are like, really? Oh, okay, sure, that's fine, I guess. Mangroves they cared about. So that's the case study. What I wanted to present on today is to use that case study to think about this intellectual framework for what is important when we think about choosing different infrastructural interventions. And I would include in that non-structural. We've talked a lot about structural, gray, green, hybrid, but there's also non-structural interventions such as zoning and planning. Okay? And if you think about that as a whole package. I did an external solicitation with this particular group. It's an ongoing process. So what I'm presenting today is work in progress, where I asked them, these represent experts from a wide range of backgrounds and a lot of policy people, about what was important to them. The fundamental research question is what are the most important factors that should or do influence decisions regarding the particular types of coastal infrastructure that will be chosen for a particular site. So that's what I want to get this interdisciplinary perspective on. But after Sandy, by the way, here, Rachel. So I took the answers from those surveys, coded them, grouped them, and fundamentally the things that appear to matter fall into 4 categories. There's technical and ecological, which is what we've heard a lot about today. It's all very important, right? But it's also kind of like we know that's important. So I'm going to focus more on, and then there's the financial questions, which we also know are important. That comes both in the question of how much it costs, but also the question of what the country or the government can afford, which are 2 different questions, right? I'm going to give you more detail on each of these. The third category is this idea of ethical and policy questions. It's the distribution of costs and benefits. One of the things we know about infrastructure interventions is they stop somewhere, for one thing. What happens outside of where they stop? How is the distribution of risk? And how does that match to the distribution of costs? Some of the questions there. And then there's sort of questions of how well the particular infrastructure choices fit in social and community settings. Does it provide the aesthetics and the other co-benefits that a community needs? So if we imagine thinking about choices, we can realize that you can evaluate each of those categories separately, and that they each contribute to figuring out what's going to be the best fit. I'll give you a mangrove example in social and community. For example, this is maybe the least obvious. I took a class down to Belize to do a climate change plan for the town of Vancouver. And they have Jim Pissarro, an audience, Jim was part of this project. They are redoing the mouth of their river. And the students were convinced that we should be, and the mouth of the river is right in the center of town. The students were convinced that we should be putting mangroves at the mouth of the river in the center of town because it would provide all of the ecological benefits that we associate with. It would help stabilize the riverbank, it would provide fish habitat, it would provide all those things that seem like a great idea. We go down and we present to community members, and they're like, oh no, why would you want to bring the jungle into the city? That makes no sense. Okay, you know what? And if we built it, and there was a neighbor who was like, oh no, you can't do that because then the boys are going to hang out there and I cannot see them. And I won't be able to know if I'm safe and if the neighborhood is safe because we recognize disability. All those sorts of aesthetic and fitness things that are not so obvious if you don't live there. Right? It was a great learning experience for students. So what I have done is, I hope your eyes are younger than mine, frankly, but I put these fitness factors onto a sheet along with background, with the questions, more details on what those indications are. What I thought I would do is pass this out, and we could take 10 minutes, and you could look at it, think about this particular case study, talk to the person next to you, and think about what you know, what you don't know, and what the important questions would be. The thing I'll ask you, though, is to work from the bottom up, if you would, because I think we've done a lot from the top down, not so much economics or financial, but, anyway, we have to do something. So if you would try and work from the bottom up, and I know for some of you this is not your area of expertise, and that's okay, because you're not going to get the right answers here, and I know for the engineers that can be stressful. Am I wrong?
You work well.
But give it a try. So if you need to move to sit next to somebody and talk to them, please feel free, or you can just think. So I'm just asking you to think about what you know from the case study, which is not much. What answers here can you see? So if we just look at the bottom one, to what degree does the action match the local plans, local place attachments and aesthetics, recreational and livelihood goals? Guess we know the mangroves are reasonably good. Another thing, a huge thing. People are probably pretty happy to know that they can get to the mainland during a hurricane. That sort of thing. You just want to use your imagination and think about these factors for like 5, 8 minutes, and then we'll talk about it. You can talk. So it is a little frustrating. Clearly, the 7 minutes I gave you on the case study was not enough to answer the question, obviously. But, hopefully it was interesting. What I thought I would do is step through from the top to the bottom, and hopefully you'll have things to say as we go through. So when we think about the technical and resilience, the technical and ecological fit starts with this question of resilience. Is the action effective for the proposed threat? How well does it work in a changing and uncertain climate? I really liked Kirk's comments about the idea of triggering events and then staging the intervention so that it matches the risks as they become realized. Because timing is really an essential question, right? We know the direction of change, but we don't really know is the time of change. And so if we can think about how to stage that. The other question that I thought was very interesting that people brought up, that the technical experts brought up, is the question of what happens if the intervention fails. So if you're thinking about the worst consequence of the intervention that you choose, what is, the worst that you can do if it fails? And those are some of the resilience and effectiveness questions that came up. In terms of fit to on-site and off-site characteristics, these are the things that we understand, I think, pretty well. The amount of space available for the action, the energy, the waves, the sea level, the wave height, salt concentration, effects on nearby vegetation and structure. And the ecological side, what I wanted to point out in particular is this idea of the ecological lift, which may or may not be familiar to you, the idea that as we do these interventions, it should not just not harm the ecology, but it should actually improve the ecology. And the greener and hybrid options, the nature-based options, provide that as a potential. And that should be one of the conditions that we're trying to achieve when we look at these interventions, if we can. This is an ideal world. This is all optimizing everything, right? Not be able to do all that, but that's all right. And then finally, the life of the structure is benefits in the short term. How far do they carry over into the long term? And that was a significant question. When it comes to the financial fitness, there's a cost-benefit balance, which again we understand pretty well. The question of maintenance becomes really interesting from a social perspective when you think about green infrastructure, because one of the things about distributed systems is the maintenance is not as well understood and has to be undertaken in typically a different way than just with a nice structural. You put in a dam, you just put the maintenance engineers out there to fix it. You put in green swales across the entire community, and all of a sudden you're having a whole different upkeep issue. And that has to be part of the consideration as we think about these alternatives. Does that make sense to people?
Well, if I could just throw in one thing about we learned when we were down there, is just the fertility of getting mangrove swamps started, like growing these things and getting them to maintain. The ones they had were already under some stress, some environmental stress. I mean, there was some garbage that was in them. And they said they were doing some work to keep them up periodically, but it's just hard to set up. And it's a fragile environment. And until they get really good, it's something to talk about.
And we saw the same thing in Belize, where the issue of garbage is just a huge challenge in coastal areas. Because so much plastic washes ashore. So much, an incredible, mind-blowing amount of plastic. And if you have this complex root system, the maintenance becomes really difficult. It's actually not that different if you're looking at a community in Chicago where you're putting in complicated planting to manage your flood water system. Then you have to be sure that your homeowners understand which are the weeds and which are the plants. Right? It's not necessarily an obvious question. So these maintenance things Financial capacity, like I said, is sort of the difference between that and the cost benefit is whether you can actually come up with the money. In this particular case, they borrowed the money.
Crowdfunded. They were crowdfunded.
Yeah. Oh, it'd be a big crowd. In the ethical and policy business, did some of you get to this section? Can you think about this a little bit? Okay. So, environmental justice and distributional equity. You remember back to your philosophy classes, the difference between procedural equity and distributional equity. But so procedure is whether the process itself is good. Distribution is whether the outcome is good. And I find it incredibly helpful for students to make that differentiation because it explains a lot about the world. You don't always get a good process or a good outcome, but hopefully you at least get one or the other. Anyway, so in environmental justice is the reference to whether, in fact, it's benefiting the communities that have traditionally been less served one way or another, whether they have more environmental harm or whether they have more poverty, the environmental justice communities. And so because these are spatial outcomes and people live in neighborhoods, it's really important to think about the justice consequences of the outcomes when the infrastructure goes in, who it benefits and who it doesn't. I personally am very interested to see where the seawalls for Boston get built, when they get built, where they end. I'm just saying. Okay, maybe the engineers will tell me there will never be seawalls here.
There will never be seawalls here.
There will never be seawalls here?
No, that's not true.
When will there be seawalls here?
They're already here. They're already here. But we can limit them. They don't have to be everywhere.
Good. Planning approach. Of course, it's interesting to me. See what is does the action represent a comprehensive or is it a limited response? Is it done in the context of an overall land use plan? You know, you would want to know that in fact the government of Jamaica was committed to the idea of Port Royal as a community before you invested all that money. Now, really, I think the money was there to support the airport, and Port Royal was a nice benefit. But nevertheless, we wanted to be part of a comprehensive plan and to engage local knowledge in the process. Political and regulatory feasibility. This has been a really interesting theme of this ongoing project is the question of what motivates politicians to choose innovative outcomes. Right? Because it's a risky choice to do something surprising. So, you know, the mangroves are not a particularly surprising or innovative. They're an important thing, but it's not like it's risky. Nevertheless, it was hard politically to even get that to go forward. When you start to think about something like amphibious communities, how are you going to get a politician to say yes and to take the risk for amphibious communities? On the other hand, if we don't have test cases of amphibious communities, how are we going to get those to ever be built? And so that level, and so that's sort of the political question of what motivates the politicians to take a risk. Regulatory is simply how complicated is it going to be to get it permitted? We all know it's better to do something that you get permitted in a couple of months than it is something you get permitted in 5 years. But that's just money talking.
But do you think that the political will for the mangroves was the untestedness of the mangroves or the fact that they had to be funded separately?
I think the benefit was less obvious. And so because it had to be funded separately, it required a strong advocate. Dale Weber and Mona Weber from the University of Massachusetts were the strong advocates for the follow-up of the mangrove. And I think that without those sparks, it would not have happened realistically. You know, I mean, that's sort of the way life is, really, that a few people who are really committed to something make it different. You so in this particular case, I think that, as I understand it, the main barrier was just getting the politicians to believe it was important. And feasible. Data and experience has been another ongoing theme of this project. And it sort of goes back to the political risk-taking. If we don't have the data to show what are the important conditions and what are the actual outcomes, then the risk goes way up, and the communities are much less likely to take the risk to do something innovative. And the data is what gives the policymakers the cover, right? So like, oh no, this is fine. We can do this because we know that it's going to work, and that's how we know it's going to work. And so if this isn't, frankly, I'm struggling. I'm still doing the coding. This is an ongoing project, and data and experience has moved around a little bit. It used to be its own fifth top category. Now I'm thinking it's better here. I'm glad to take comments. Part of why I'm presenting this is that I'm interested in getting feedback on how well this matches to your experience from this diverse group. Because each of you will know one of these categories pretty well. Maybe more than one. I don't know. Anybody here do EIS statements for a living? Then when we go to social and community, which we talked about a little bit, there's this question of what was the process that was actually followed. In this particular case, I just don't have enough information, honestly, to tell you whether it was a particularly collaborative process with the Port Royal community. I know that there were hearings, because those are documented in the environmental impact statement, but whether it went beyond that. From a planning perspective, what matters in public engagement is whether, my humble opinion, is whether the impact, the community engagement made a difference in the decisions that were made, right? So it's not just whether there was a process, but whether the process made a difference in that outcome. And that's the meaning of collaboration. And it goes back to the question of partners that other speakers have brought up, and the difficulty of getting the right partners actually working in the process. Capacity of institutions and networks. Ideally, these projects actually give you more social capacity as they go forward than you had when you started. And if we think about the process of the mangrove in this particular case, it increased the status and the engagement of the University of West community. And so it had a very positive effect on at least some stakeholders. Now, whether it had it on the community itself, a little less sure. I'm glad to take your comments as we get forward. By the way, let's just say that again. Fits in local culture and goals. To what degree did the action match local plans, local place attachments, aesthetic, recreational, and livelihood goals? Comments, observations, things you're thinking about, things that we're missing? People who don't usually talk? Which is actually most of you. They're pretty quiet.
I think past history impacts how, especially Caribbean communities, look at projects. If they turn on, I'm sure, around and you see soccer fields that were built and kids can't play on them because maintenance. Soccer field. How are you going to maintain a fragile environment for people that run their boats into the mangroves because of tying them off, because that's closer to their habitat where they're living. You have to change your social and moral thoughts on environment. You have to feed them. You have to, so it's a big issue. So looking at what goes on in Boston, comparing not information in this next couple of days, looking at the diversity of projects around the world, whether it's Malaysia, where they're building, moving out fishermen's homes and putting in ponds so that we can shrimp. It really comes down to what did you do for the last year. We travel, which many of us have, to look at some past prime minister's name on the airport, but no name on the mountain. So when you're talking about government being involved, there's more impetus for my name to be put on the airport. Other look at the environment. We are just getting there in the United States ourselves. Take back 20 years, things have changed.
And I think that really points out a term that I hope you go home with, which is the idea of co-benefit, right? You want to look and see that projects provide resilience, but what else do they do? They should do something else. And hopefully that's ecological lift. It could also be livelihood of one way or another. It's relevant in south of Boston as well as in Jamaica, that these coastal plans have to address the impact on livelihood and lifestyle as we go forward. So. Other thoughts? Yes.
The talk of the board. Where did expert elicitation fit into the decision process? Is it a separate activity?
So the expert elicitation is what gave us these as a theory of decision. But the case study is entirely separate. This came way after. This is just a lot of 6 months. So it's not in progress. Somebody kind of fell apart. I need to say there. Sorry. Just a few final points. First, that we like to see horses. Second, that, this holistic perspective, addressing social, ecological, and technical fitness is the main message I want you to take from this framework. Particular challenges and benefits for greener solutions. What I didn't talk much about was the question of barriers to that, and I just wanted to point out a couple of resources that may be helpful. I brought some copies of an article that Anna and I worked on adaptation choices in coastal communities in Massachusetts. That's from 2014. There's also, I didn't bring copies of this one, but a brand new article out in JAPA from a week ago that looks at a broad survey of communities across the country, particularly those that are already committed to climate because they're part of a safety organization and what steps they're taking for adaptation. So both of those address barriers and leadership and may be useful for you. I brought a copy if you want one. So I can take questions. It's late in the time. And that's our website again. And I just want to say thank you all for coming. The photos that I didn't credit were by Rebecca Spricka, who's our project manager. So you know that. And I hope this was valuable. Please do your evaluations. Let us know what worked, what was helpful to you, what you'd like to see in a different day. Yes.
I just have one question on Jamaica. So it was all about the engineering. Mm-hmm. It was all about the causeway going to the airport. Did they do anything for the airport? So if spend $65 million to just get to the airport. Like, I can get back and forth to the airport, but if the airport is flooded or out or damaged, then
Nope, as far as I know, they didn't do anything.
so to me, it's a very limited scope in that perspective, because I understand you can't move the airport, but you can't just, I understand that one storm damaged the road, but it's nice to have a road that's nowhere then at that point. So.
Yeah, keep planning. That is not a good solution.
The idea is that I make first the assumption that airport is can survive at any course of nature, and it's worth spending that money to make that road or maintain that road. At the same time, put this money maybe that it's not worth. But we talk about livelihood. If that airport does not survive, except for maybe the Department of Public Highways and maintain the road. So every time there's a big disaster, anyway, the water recedes into us, the road is still there.
Yeah.
But the building is gone. So what are we doing that project for?
It's a good question.
So it's useless project.
Well, assuming that the airport washed away and the ability to get back out there within a day or so.
And for the helicopter fire, that's it. Now, for the livelihood, you can't convert that area like Chicago or San Francisco. They have the farmers, what do you call that? Fisherman's wharf. That's where you attract people to invest for livelihoods. The airport, what can you do in there? Sell newspapers?
Jim, did you want to?
Just very fundamental underlying question. What's the likelihood they would ever have done this project if the airport were not in between?
Port Royal.
And the mainland.
The truth of the matter is it would be a lot cheaper to just run boats up there than to spend that much money. And there was discussion that the GHD people like have an evacuation plan or.
But it's just like that whole thing where it's so
It's a ferry.
Yeah.
and it's actually, that if that goes away,
And that's the core benefit, right? Is
yeah.
that the road protects the Kingston and mainland, which is a valuable thing to have. But it depends what your purpose is, right? If you're talking about the airport, you have to kind of do the whole.
And I think I heard you ask how high, I still mentioned that we raised the whole thing 2 meters.
Okay.
So that was the intention, and that is the protection for the
2
airport.
meters then go down here.
Yes!
About 2 meters go down. I also like the idea of like some more community or recreational access on the mangrove side. So someplace to put your boats or whatever, integrate that recreational benefit so that they aren't just stomping over the mangroves and stuff like that. But if there's access points or recreational points on that side, that's going to be a community benefit.
Getting the docks that we saw, I don't think they're quite there yet. They were just getting sort of functional. So I don't know if that's the line of that area. As much as livelihood, survival.
We had to do something in Montserrat, blew out the whole capital city with a volcano, right? The airport, everything, right? And they had to redevelop the side of the island.